So what am I doing differently this postpartum, this birth and postpartum, compared to my first time around? I will tell you, because I've learned a thing or two or 12 that I think I had heard, like is important to focus on. But when you're a first time mom and you're excited to finally have a baby and, think about all the cute baby clothes and all the things and the nurseries and the showers and all of the things that get really exciting because you're just so looking forward to having this cute little baby, it can be so easy to kind of put your own recovery and your own healing and how you're going to feel postpartum on the back burner, or just kind of like think of it second to the baby. And while the baby is obviously so important, what I quickly learned my first time around is that if I feel absolutely miserable, which to some extent, is not abnormal postpartum, there is absolutely a recovery period. But if I feel like I can hardly function and I'm not sleeping very well because that's just part of postpartum and breastfeeding is challenging and all of these things that can come up, it only makes it that much harder to enjoy those like fleeting moments with a newborn. And I remember feeling so guilty. My last postpartum, my first postpartum experience, my first birth experience, because it was something I had looked forward to for so long. It was something that I had prayed for a long time that I didn't know would ever happen for me. I thought maybe it never would. I would never experience what it's like to have a baby and like birth a baby and, experience postpartum and all of those things, breastfeeding, et cetera. And when it did, I was so confused why I was like, I don't actually I'm not enjoying this. I'm actually like drowning. And I actually think that's a good like reality check because I think I may have had a little bit of when you've hoped and prayed and waited for something or wanted to have a child or, be pregnant your whole life and always, maybe your biggest dream was to be a mom. I don't think it's that abnormal to, in some ways or another, kind of like romanticize the experience or idealize the experience and there's also reality to it, right? Like you are sleep deprived a lot of the time and you are recovering and there is, clogged ducts and supply challenges and all of the things. And so anyways, and supply meaning like breastfeeding supply or milk supply. But I feel like I learned a lot going through it the first time around because what you don't know. And while well-intended and like, women who have gone before you may be able to speak some of that into you, it's just like, you just don't know what you don't know, and you think it'll be fine. Like, it'll be great. I'm gonna have my baby. I'll be so happy. It's gonna be awesome. And ultimately it is. Like, ultimately I was still so happy and so thankful and felt so blessed. But I just found myself feeling like I am not enjoying this experience. I feel like I'm drowning. Is this ever going to end? Like, when does the fun part come? When does the enjoyable part come? When will I feel better? And so anyway, in this episode, I just thought I would share how I'm kind of preparing for birth and postpartum a little bit differently and what I'm prioritizing this time around compared to the way I approached it the last time around. It'll be quick. It'll be short and sweet. I hope. I don't plan to make this very long, but I hope this encourages you and maybe gives you some ideas if maybe you've already been through postpartum one time and had a tough experience and are hoping for a better experience the next time or want to be more prepared the next time. Or maybe it is your first time and you want to really set yourself up for the best experience possible, given the fact that there are tons of things that are out of your control. There are plenty of things that are in your control and that you can prepare for to some extent to make it just a little bit easier on yourself, to make it a little bit more enjoyable so that you really can soak up that newborn bubble. Because not everyone loves the newborn stage, but I think part of that is just because so often we are so ill prepared for birth and for postpartum, and that impacts the way we enjoy that state. So all of that said, let's jump into everything I'm doing to prepare for this birth and postpartum the second time around that are a little bit different from what I focused on the first time around.
You're listening to She with me, Jordan Lee Dooley, a faith-based wellness podcast to support you in your motherhood journey and inspire you to be good to your body. Come invited, leave ignited.
So quick backstory. When it came to preparing for postpartum, my last pregnancy, first birth experience, I did, kind of some of the like things that you would find on a checklist. I got, a postpartum cart prepared and I put some recovery things and postpartum underwear and all that kind of stuff you just find if you like look at a Pinterest checklist. And my mom guided me on a few of those things I would need. And so we had definitely like some of those things prepared. But in general, I felt like I didn't really have a lot of preparation for birth. I met with a doula like once or twice. She gave me a little bit of an explanation. I read a book, I think it was called, it's an Ina May Gaskin book, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it was called, but I read the very popular book by Ina May Gaskin. And I had higher expectations for it, to be honest. This isn't like a negative review, but I just felt like it was just a ton of birth stories, which is basically what it is, and like a ton of like natural birth stories. And in many ways, you know, it kind of was like, it can be empowering to be like, okay, if they can do it, I can do it. But I don't feel like I learned a lot, if that makes sense. Like, I really wish I would have taken like more of a birth prep class, and not necessarily one offered by the hospital, but a little bit more of like a holistic, you know, approach, things like that. And so I just felt a little bit like thrown off, even though I did, just based on conversations with plenty of friends of mine who had gone before me, felt somewhat prepared for advocating for myself and creating a birth plan and all of that. I did the best I could, knowing what I knew. Having been through it and having had a birth go semi-sideways, although at the end of the day I had a healthy baby, I've learned a little bit more about how to prepare and what to look for in a doula when it comes to like advocacy and what to, you know, personnel, all of those things, like not even just a doula, like a birth team in general. I switched up my birth team entirely, just having gone through the experience once. And ultimately, I'm just getting way more prepared way earlier in the process, because what happened the last time around, you know, a lot of times they tell you, oh, if you're, you know, if this is your first birth, it's very common that you'll go after your due date. You'll probably have this baby a week after your due date. That's not uncommon. So that's kind of what I had in my mind. At the very least, I was thinking like it'd be at least 39 weeks. Okay. So what I had planned to do, just especially because at that time, life was very full. We had just also adopted our son earlier in my pregnancy. I was pretty early along when we adopted him. So I was like also adjusting to new mom life in a slightly different way. And so there was a lot of, you know, transition that was happening. And life is full now, especially with two toddlers, just in a different way. But I have a completely different mindset. And so, you know, the plan I had was, okay, when I'm like 36, 37 weeks, I'm going to see if my mom will come and spend a couple days with me, and we'll have kind of a cooking marathon. And we'll just prep a bunch of postpartum meals and like have all of that in the freezer. And honestly, in hindsight, I realized how that was probably not the best plan, because it's kind of overwhelming to do it all at once. But also, you know, it's like you're kind of gambling when you wait till that far along. Like at 36, 37 weeks, like you're pretty much full term at that point. So while it's not common to have a baby at that stage, you never really know what's going to happen. And that's basically what happened to me. So when I was 36 weeks and 6 days, my mom came into town. She lives a couple hours away. And that night, my water broke. And the next day my baby was born. And I was like, wait, what? Like, we were going to spend 3 to 4, maybe 5 days cooking when I was 37 weeks so that we had a bunch of, you know, freshly prepared freezer meals ready to go. But that didn't happen because the baby decided to come. And we were basically left with nothing. Thank God my mom was in town, because she was able to help with our son that we had adopted earlier in the year. When we were in the hospital, she was able to kind of like scramble and make a couple stews for me. So I had something the first couple days postpartum, but I had hoped to have, you know, several weeks of meals prepared. But instead of being prepared ahead of time, we were like scrambling, and my mom was constantly in the kitchen trying to make me some food and whatnot that first week postpartum. But she also kind of had to go back and forth to home because we had other family things going on that she was trying to help with. So it was kind of a hot mess in many ways. Like, we did the best we could, but I did not like that feeling of feeling so ill prepared. And it was very much an eye-opener for me of like, if I ever get this experience again, I'm doing it different the next time around. And so anyway, that was a learning lesson. And basically now this time around, I'm focusing a lot less on baby stuff and nursery decorations and registries, and focusing so much more on preparing for my own birth and recovery. Now, I will say, you can do all the prep in the world when it comes to birth, and things can still go opposite of your plan. And I learned that, you know, somewhat the hard way the last time. So I'm holding it loosely, but I'm also doing a lot more to prepare for the birth experience, to assemble a birth team that really feels like the right fit. I will say for me, I didn't really think a lot about birth until I was already like 34 weeks the last time, maybe 33 weeks, like until I got really close to the end, because I was kind of in denial. I had PTSD from, you know, recurrent losses prior to that. So I think there was something in my brain that like could not accept that a live baby might come out of me. and I might have to care for said baby. Like, it was so hard for my brain to conceptualize after having had, you know, a long journey and several losses and whatnot. So I kind of like, just for my own mental sanity, kind of lived in denial and didn't want to connect with the baby, didn't want to find out the gender, didn't really want to think about birth too much until I absolutely had to. And it was like happening, you know. So I think that's part of what influenced why I decided to wait to prep postpartum meals, why I decided to, you know, not think a whole lot about that until I was, you know, in that last 6 to 8, maybe 9, 10 weeks. Anyway, this time around, specifically one big thing I'm doing differently. There's a lot, but one big thing I'm doing differently is I started the postpartum nourishing meal prep way earlier, like at 23, 24 weeks-ish, 24, 25 weeks is when I started prepping postpartum meals. But instead of trying to just kind of like do one big cooking marathon or, you know, something like that where we cook for 3 or 4 days or whatever, I decided to make it a lot less overwhelming on myself because I also have 2 kids that I'm parenting at this point and I still work some, you know, so, but what I can do is set aside maybe 2 or 3 hours one time a week for 8, 9, 10 weeks to make a recipe, a nourishing recipe in bulk. So I'll usually like find a recipe that I've either used before and loved that's really nourishing and really great for postpartum because I try to focus on like warm, nourishing, you know, protein dense foods, things like that versus like cold, crunchy, raw food. And so thinking about, and also like not super carb heavy, like not a lot of pastas and the type of things like meal trains might bring you. I'm trying to minimize having like a lot of DoorDash and like pasta heavy casseroles and that type of thing and focusing more on like broths and stews and, you know, that kind of like nourishing food. And so anyways, all of that said, picking a recipe that I've either used before or that really meets the criteria of what's important from a like nourishment and nutrition standpoint postpartum, picking one and then like doubling or tripling it so that I get anywhere from 6 to 8 to 12 servings in one cooking session. So I'll spend, you know, a couple hours on a day that my husband can help with the kids or a day that we have help with the kids. And instead of working, I'll spend a couple hours in the kitchen and just prepare that meal in bulk, that one recipe in bulk. If I have a little extra free time, I'll also try to prep a freezer meal, meaning you kind of prep all the ingredients, the sauce, whatever it is. Like we made chicken meatballs the other day. My sister-in-law came over. She helped me make chicken meatballs while I made like a, what was it? Like a creamy chicken and rice kind of dish in batch or like a batch dish. So I made like 8 servings of it. Anyway, so she helped make a freezer meal that my kids and my husband and maybe myself, but primarily them can eat as a meal when I am postpartum and not wanting to cook and not able to cook a whole lot. So there's little things I'm adding in to help support my family because this time around it's different. I mean, I have kids who are eating full-blown meals and solid foods plus a husband, and I don't necessarily want them to be door dashing every single meal. I'm sure they still will a little bit. I'm sure they're going to have some chicken nuggets and some mac and cheese here and there. But if I can like have some nourishing meals on hand for them too, great. But my top priority is getting one batch meal a week done for about 10 weeks. So if I start around, you know, if you start around 20 something weeks, 24, 25, then 10 weeks later, you're pretty much done with all your prep by 34, 35 weeks. So for me, that feels way more proactive and it breaks it down into like micro chunks or micro, like, you know, preparations, a couple hours every week for just one big recipe in batch, has simplified it a lot. And so now I'm several weeks into that and it's been really great. I feel like even more prepared now than I did at 37 weeks the last time around. And so anyway, that is one big thing I'm doing very differently this postpartum compared to last postpartum. Just my preparation from like a nutrition, freezer meal, food standpoint, night and day. And I already feel so much more peace of mind and it's not overwhelming. A lot of times, sometimes my meal prep will look like, hey, I'm making this big healthy shepherd's pie casserole for dinner tonight. So I'm just going to make 1 or 2 more. Like I'm just going to double or triple the recipe. So I'll have those and I can put them away. And then that's like what I do for the week. So that being a priority more so than making a registry or, you know, redecorating a nursery. Like at some point I want to make one of my kids' nurseries. We're going to like have the boys share a room and then we'll use the existing room that one of them is in right now, a little bit more girly. But we'll get to that. Like she's not even going to be in there the first 6 months, if not more. Right. It's funny because I remember somebody that I love and adore said something funny and it's a little bit of a joke, but honestly not that inaccurate. She said something like, really all a baby needs when they're first born is like a boob or a bottle and a diaper and maybe some onesies. and like a safe sleeping space. But we like get so focused on all the baby gadgets and all the showers and all the things and all the cute nursery decor and like feel the pressure to have all of that done before the baby comes. And like, of course, it's not that abnormal. Like if you think about how much time and energy and mental energy can go into preparing for that on top of just like everyday life while you're pregnant and not feeling great and all of the things that can happen when you're pregnant, like no wonder like our own birth prep and recovery prep kind of just becomes an afterthought. And like we squeeze in a little here and there, but very few women are really well prepared because our culture tells us to focus on all of these baby gadgets and cute outfits and nurseries and all the things that like are honestly just extras for kids, you know, or for babies when they're first born. So it's like you can get to the nursery, you can maybe get it started, but you don't have to feel the pressure to finish it before baby's born. And I think that was something I learned this time around, that it's like, okay, we're going to focus on me because they're really going to be dependent. You know, a baby first few months postpartum is very dependent on mom, and it's demanding, especially when you're recovering and especially if you're breastfeeding. And so really giving myself, you know, preparing in the best ways possible to give myself the nutrients I need, the sustenance I need, and keeping it really easy. Number one priority this time. So that's a huge, huge thing. Probably the number one thing I'm doing differently. A few other things I'm doing differently this time around is taking a breastfeeding course. I've actually taken it before. It was really helpful, but I took it when I was like 2 weeks postpartum and struggling with breastfeeding and trying to like watch it and apply it at the same time. So I'm proactively taking that course again. It's called the Thompson method, I believe. It's just a more gentle approach to breastfeeding, and overall it gave us much better results than kind of the forceful techniques that tend to be used or taught in the hospital settings. And so just kind of revisiting that, even though I've breastfed before and it's like way less of a steep learning curve the second time around, every baby's different. Every postpartum experience is different. Every breastfeeding experience can be different. And so just knowing that, I want to be a little bit prepared and kind of have a refresher. So I'm focusing on preparing myself before I'm trying to actively breastfeed again. Another thing that I'm doing is taking a birth prep course to focus on kind of reducing tearing and just preparing my body. And like, I didn't really do that last time. I had like a few tips from just some doulas. I read a little bit of a book and I felt like I was pretty prepared just because I had like friends speaking into me. But this time I really want to take a class and like kind of do a deep dive. Also from like a mental standpoint, a mindset standpoint, because I definitely have some hesitancies and fears around birth that are different from the first time. The first time it was because it was unknown, right? I'd never done it before. This time it's like, okay, now I have fears that I'll have a repeat experience of my first experience, which kind of went sideways, ended in an unwanted, unplanned C-section. Ultimately, baby was okay and healthy. I was okay and healthy, but wasn't what I hoped for birth. And so just assembling, like this time I'm being much more intentional about being more picky and interviewing a birth team members, like a doula. I have actually a doula, a midwife, and an OB, because if for some reason I need to transfer or end up not using a midwife, I want to feel like the OB is like the best fit possible. So I've been really picky about that, done a lot of interviewing, asked a lot of questions, etc. So anyway, that's a big thing. But I have both. Like I've chosen to have both. And I know that's not necessarily always feasible for everybody, but that was something that I felt like I want to feel really solid regardless of which direction my birth could go. And so having a birth course and like a birth prep course, doing some like mindset work in terms of just like preparing my heart and my mind, because there are some like doubts and belief challenges after when you've had birth trauma, when you've had pregnancy trauma, that can really shape the way you view your body's ability to birth. I remember when my son was born, came a little bit early, not like super premature or anything, but he was basically right at term versus I thought he'd come at 40 weeks. When that happened unexpectedly, and then when my birth went completely sideways from what I had hoped for, I just remember feeling like I barely stumbled over the finish line when it came to having a live birth. And I remember thinking, my body kind of stinks at this pregnancy thing, like in this birth thing. Like this just doesn't seem to end well for me. So I'm really trying to like rewire those thoughts and like prepare my heart and my mind from a biblical standpoint, and just from like a practical standpoint too. So focusing a lot more on that side of things versus things like nurseries and cute clothes. Of course, we've gotten some cute clothes, but it's just not like where I'm spending most of my energy. And also I learned with both my boys, they live in like onesies and pajamas for the first couple months anyway. Like it's really difficult to get them in a lot of cute outfits. So I have a couple for like some outfit pictures or like cute pictures. And that's pretty much it. I'm not like stocking her whole like dresser and closet and all of that. We'll get to that. A couple other things I'm doing differently this time. pelvic floor therapy, not just during pregnancy. I did that a little bit during my last pregnancy to prepare for birth, but especially postpartum to really help with just recovery, scar tissue. I did some pelvic floor. It wasn't pelvic floor. I did some physical therapy to work on scar tissue because I had a C-section that, again, I wasn't hoping for, but I had. And we, like, probably 4 to 6 months postpartum, I started doing some physical therapy to work on breaking up that scar tissue and like scar recovery. But I started it a little bit later than I would have liked to. So this time around, I plan to be a little bit more proactive about just general like pelvic floor birth recovery with my physical therapist versus, putting it off and waiting. And then another huge thing that I plan to do this time that I didn't even know about last time that I wish I would have, I am going to be working with my friend Stacia. She runs the only postpartum care clinic in the United States. And I want every woman to know that this exists because really, if you think about it, postpartum care in the United States is garbage. Like it is literally a 6-week follow-up visit for them to like check and see how you healed physically, ask you a few questions about how you're doing mentally, maybe suggest birth control or some meds and send you on your way. That is not healthy postpartum care. Now, I know some like doulas and midwives will provide a little bit more postpartum care support. So that's awesome if you have a team like that. But in general, kind of the general standard is like really kind of bare minimum. And women are not getting what we really need. And a lot of women lack like the village that a lot of, generations previous to us and, in history, women had before because they lived in close-knit communities. They lived close to their families, all of those things. And so, a lot of times postpartum, when women are postpartum, there's a lot of imbalances as your hormones try to, kind of find some sort of, equilibrium. There can be deficiencies as your body has just been through growing a whole human and then birthing a human, possibly losing a lot of blood and potentially breastfeeding. Like all of those things can lead to deficiencies, which can be really tied to our mental state and the anxieties we feel and like the symptoms we have and the way we feel and the way we show up and all of that postpartum, coupled with the fact that most of the time you're just not sleeping very well. It's like, hey, do this major event, right? Like this major physical feat, whether it's pushing a baby out vaginally or having a major abdominal surgery, either way you slice it, it is an incredibly taxing thing physically to have a baby. And then don't really sleep very well. Don't be very well rested. Also nourish that baby with your body and try to heal from that experience and feel great. Like it's like, that's like a really unrealistic expectation that I think we've put on ourselves and put on women. That's why having like nourishing, healing meals are so huge. And also why having, like things prepared to support your recovery is so important. And what I love about what my friend Stacia is doing with Postpartum Care USA is she is providing such more comprehensive care, postpartum care for moms, not only from like a blood work standpoint to kind of figure out where your levels are, but also like a customized protocol based on what your levels are and your minerals and your hormones and everything are showing. Nutrition education, all of these things to really help support moms postpartum physically, mentally, emotionally, etc. And so she has just such a great concept, the only true postpartum care clinic in the United States. And so she's really looking at root causes to symptoms women may be having postpartum, whether that's mental, physical, or both, and helping support them in their healing, recovery, and like overall health journey through postpartum. And postpartum isn't just like the first 2 weeks after your baby's born. And it's not even really the first 40 days. There's a pretty popular book called The First 40 Days. And that is the most like critical healing period from a recovery standpoint and from a like nutrition needs standpoint and whatnot. But really postpartum goes long beyond those first like few weeks postpartum. And so while those are the weeks we want to be most prepared for from like a meal prep standpoint and whatnot, because it's the biggest transition, biggest, like the most intense part of recovery, et cetera, it's like months beyond that, right? It can really, some people will say it's like that first whole year after your baby's born. And so all of that said, this postpartum care, like being a lot more comprehensive and being something that is so much more individualized to what your body is saying that it needs and your unique symptoms and, listening and then approaching that from a more holistic perspective versus just like here's some birth control or here's some, meds. And there's nothing wrong with meds if it's something you really, really need from a mental health standpoint. And I think it's kind of such a disservice to women who are experiencing like one of the most challenging things they'll go through physically and the most challenging recoveries a lot of times they'll go through physically, to call care for postpartum a 6-week checkup. Like it should be so much more comprehensive than that. And that's what my friend Stacia is providing through her, background as an RN and really her expertise when it comes to postpartum healing, recovery, balancing things, meeting nutrient deficiencies, all of that kind of thing. And so I will be working with her postpartum this time around. And I'm so thankful for that. I learned about it when I was probably like 16 to 18 months postpartum this last time around. So I was kind of through the thick of it and had kind of settled into like a lot more of feeling like myself again and normalcy and all of that. But there were still like some things that I wish I would have known. There was a lot of things I wish I would have known. And I think it could have really significantly shifted my postpartum experience had I known about what she was doing at the time and had some suggestions, some guidance, some testing done to just kind of figure out where my body was settling when I was in the process of, healing, recovery, breastfeeding, nursing a baby, et cetera. So that's one big thing I will be doing this time postpartum that I think every mom should do. I think, and I talked with her about this, I think it's more common. I'm actually going to interview her on the show. I actually think it's more common that a lot of times like second time moms or third time moms see the need and the value of something like that more than first time moms, because like I said, you just don't know what you don't know. And I didn't think, oh yeah, I need to work with this postpartum nurse and get all this testing done and really, but like now I understand it. And once you go through it, you're much more likely to understand it. And everyone's postpartum experience is different. I hope it's a breeze and a walk in the park for you, but it can be really difficult physically, emotionally, mentally, et cetera. And so having proper support, having some insight into how your body is recovering, where you might have deficiencies and how you can meet those deficiencies to help. Like I remember I was talking to Stacia. This was when I was like well past the initial first few months postpartum. But I remember telling her I just feel, I was telling her how I was feeling and some of the reactions I was having that didn't really quite match the situation. And she was like, oh, sounds like you have a zinc deficiency. We should get that checked out. I'm like, how do you know that? So just having someone like that in your corner, huge for just feeling supported, but also being able to support your body as holistically and appropriately and effectively as possible. So that's kind of my comprehensive list. I'm preparing nourishing meals one at a time for about 10-ish weeks prior to when I get into the end of pregnancy, kind of prepping those in batch, making sure they're nourishing. A lot of them are warm, protein dense, soft foods, not a lot of raw, crunchy vegetables or pasta heavy casseroles, that kind of thing. My hope is that we won't even do a meal train and minimize the door dashing and all of that we ended up having to rely on somewhat postpartum, especially for my husband last time. Having some meals, freezer meals set aside, at least for that first week or two postpartum when I'm in the most intense part of recovery and transition and everything from my kids and my husband. And so doing that kind of just in small bits each week, a little bit each week, and just kind of adding to my stash slowly over time so it's not super overwhelming. Taking a birth prep course, really assembling an intentional, really strong birth team that I feel really confident with, being really picky about that, interviewing, being really intentional about who I select to have in my corner when it comes to delivery, retaking a refresher on the breastfeeding course that really helped me when I was experiencing oversupply and all of that. Also, kind of pre-shopping and finding a good lactation consultant that you can actually do. So if you take the Thompson Method breastfeeding course, which is what I would recommend, I felt like that was very helpful for me in many ways. You can also schedule one-on-one digital or virtual consults with them. And so that felt really helpful for me too, even more so than a local lactation consultant, although that can be helpful to have if you're really running into some challenges that need someone there with you physically. So I'll be kind of preparing to utilize both. And then Postpartum Care USA, working with them, in my first month or two postpartum, first couple months postpartum, to really get an idea where my levels are, help restore balance in my body, meet my nutrient needs, all of that. And then, one other thing I was going to add to that list is really being a little bit more prepared, especially now having older children in the mix, trying to kind of make a plan for how I can make the transition as seamless on them as possible, as well as practical and realistic for me. Not everyone can just go hire a bunch of childcare, but asking for help and saying specifically what I need help with and kind of preparing grandparents and my husband and whatnot for, this is what I'd really now that I've been through it, this is really what I need. I would love if grandparents can take the older boys, 2 afternoons a week so I can just have a minute to breathe without all the chaos of not only a newborn, but also older toddlers running around and climbing everything. So just kind of thinking through what would help me reset, what would help me mentally, what would help me get some rest. I straight up told my mom, I would love for you to spend this amount of time here when I first give birth, that this is what I need when I'm delivering. And so just thinking through how you want that to look and expressing that to those in your life who are willing to support you. And obviously everyone has a different setup when it comes to your village or the amount of people who can be supportive and helpful. And sometimes it's just a spouse. Sometimes there's not a whole lot of options. Sometimes it's grandparents, whatever that is. But like thinking about who would be in your circle that you could communicate ahead of time. This is how I would love help when the baby's born, the first few weeks postpartum, when I'm trying to transition and getting breastfeeding down again. That's a big thing I'm trying to be a little bit more intentional about before, because I didn't really know what I needed before. And also I was a little bit afraid to ask. So I just kind of like rolled with it. And we didn't have a lot of intentional conversations up front. So that's a big thing I'm trying to do this time around to prepare a little bit differently as well. And then in addition to that, really prioritizing my pelvic floor and just like overall physical recovery by visiting my pelvic floor and physical therapist a little bit earlier than I did the last time around. And just making that a priority, even if I only go once every other week or so, just like having some support there. Also some chiropractic care postpartum when and where I can. I did one session my last postpartum. I wish I would have done it a little bit more to help support recovery. It was just such a whirlwind and I didn't know what I needed until I looked back. So just some physical support in that way too, in addition to, you know, the meals and everything else that I'm trying to be a little bit more prepared for, the breastfeeding refresher course, all of that. So that's kind of a quick list. I think I might have missed something in that summary, but that kind of gives you an idea of like, these are some of the things. Basically, in a nutshell, I'm focusing a lot less on cute clothes and nurseries and baby gadgets and registries and a lot more on what do I need for postpartum recovery so that I can be the best mom that I can be, so that I can give my baby and my other 2 children now, because now I'll be divided by 3, the best of me. And also, you know, the last thing I would say I'm doing, this isn't so much for me, but more so my family in general, is just trying to prepare my boys for the fact that there will be a transition. And friends of mine have given me some really good advice and some suggestions on what that could look like. One of my friends told me she actually, like the last few weeks of her pregnancy, walked around kind of with like a baby doll so that her older daughter, like her toddler, got used to seeing mommy with a baby and like taking care of a baby. And I thought that's not a terrible idea to kind of introduce that concept, because the toddlers understand that there's a baby in mommy's belly, but they can't conceptualize like what that's really going to be like prior, like once baby's here, unless you kind of help give them some exposures. And so little things like that. And also just kind of thinking about how we'll do the introduction and all of that, just mentally preparing for what some of that will look like. Even like reading books. The friend I mentioned who runs Postpartum Care USA, she wrote a book called What Is Mommy Doing, I believe. And it's like a toddler book. It's a book for young kids to help them understand postpartum and why mom might be experiencing certain emotions or symptoms or not be as available, in those first few months when a baby's born. And so it can help kids transition. And it's something dad or a grandparent or a caretaker can read to a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old to help them conceptualize and understand what major transition has just happened and why mommy's different and why mommy's not as available and why mommy's always in her room with the baby and all those things. And including them in the care, and having them help in the ways that they can is something I really want to try to do too. So that's not so much about my postpartum recovery, but more for their transition when I am postpartum versus totally winging that. I'm sure there'll be things we end up winging and having to learn as we go, but just having a few things in my mind and a few things we're doing ahead of time and having on hand, such as that book, to help them understand it, to make that transition as smooth as possible, planning to spend a little bit of one-on-one time with each of them. And that's a huge thing too. If you have older children, it's not your first time postpartum. That's going back to asking grandparents or talking to your spouse about what your needs are going to be. One of those needs is probably still shepherding and spending time, at least a little bit of quality time each week, or, maybe 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day with your older child or children, so that they don't just feel like all of a sudden mom's just like completely MIA. And as a mom, I don't want to miss out on this season of their life either, although a significant part of my energy and, attention is going to have to be on the baby at first. Just even carving out like, okay, I'm going to do bedtime stories with them and then you can put them down, to my husband, or I'm going to spend an intentional 10, 15, 20 minutes playing blocks with each one of them while someone else holds the baby. Like just kind of thinking ahead on that and communicating that to other adults in my life who might be able to step in and be helpful in supporting that hope and goal. Might not happen the first 5 days postpartum, but at least, after the first week or two, once we get settled at home, I'd like to prioritize that as much as possible. So preparing ahead of time to make that a priority versus feeling like in hindsight, I wish I would have, is another small but big thing, from a family standpoint. So that's kind of what it looks like for me preparing for postpartum this time around compared to the first time around. Just have a totally different mindset on it. And birth too. I mean, preparing for birth and postpartum aren't necessarily the same thing, but they kind of go hand in hand because your birth experience absolutely can shape your postpartum experience. And I feel like that was huge for me in my last experience. Like my birth just going sideways felt like I got thrown into this whirlwind postpartum, and it was just like it took me a while to catch my breath. And so while you can't control all the things and you can't control how your birth goes, even though you can have the best plans and preparation in the world, you can be as prepared for the recovery and transition period afterwards. And I think prioritizing your own recovery and your own needs and how you're best going to support this little life that's coming into the world, as well as the family that's currently relying on you, more so than all the things society tells you need, like extra baby gadgets and epic, Pinterest-worthy nurseries and all of that. I think it really focusing on that sets moms up for so much more success. And I've heard that anecdotally from so many moms I trust. And so taking that to heart this time, I kind of learned the last time. And so doing a little bit differently this time around. It probably won't be perfect. There'll still be days I feel like a hot mess, but at least I'll feel a little bit more prepared and a little bit more supported.
To learn more about the She Podcast or get involved in our growing community, come hang out on Instagram at Jordan Lee Dooley or check out the show notes for each episode at jordanleedooley.com/show notes. Thanks for tuning in today. And until next time, stay rooted in faith and remember to do the small things to be good to your body daily.